Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Your disruption. Thank you. Goodbye. Security. Thank you. This is the Public Safety Committee meeting. This is not a public hearing. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
You are hearing some of the sounds of another battle for the Seattle City Council this week as council members discuss two controversial measures, the stay out of drug areas and the stay out of areas of prostitution, so soda and soap. What's the next move for the council on these measures? Can they pass them as a full body before they get their budget considerations started? And what is next for the King County Regional Homelessness Authority as Seattle works to renegotiate its contract with that organization? And hey, guess what? We have some questions from a show patron to answer too. So much to consider this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine. And normally I'm joined by David Croman, my co-host. He is on leave, so I'm with a very special guest, and that would be Hannah Krieg, city reporter for The Stranger. Hannah, and I wanted to check in with you on this one, super important. I saw you post about the challenges of choosing between jeans and shorts here in the early fall. Were you able to get that issue resolved? What do we got?
Today I'm wearing jeans and a t-shirt.
Right.
So sort of a good fall in between. I like it better than doing shorts and a long sleeve. Makes more sense.
Yeah, I tried that yesterday. Long shirt, and then the Daisy Dukes that I had on. I don't think it was working. So thank you for the feedback. I appreciate it. Hannah, as always, great to see you. Thank you for being with me. Thanks also to City Grind Espresso, the background noise sponsor for this podcast right here. It's on the first floor of City Hall. And a special thanks to our show patrons. Once again, we will be answering a patron's question on the show this week. I wanted to celebrate Sam as a new patron too. Very exciting. Thank you, Sam, for coming aboard. Support the show on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Thanks also to Converge Media. The video version of the podcast is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, off we go. It's right here, right now. Hannah, it was a mammoth public safety meeting this week, 4.5 hours. This regarding soap, stay out of areas of prostitution, and soda, stay out of drug areas. First things first, I just wanted to pass it along to people. If you didn't see it, another raucous meeting required some work from the police outreach and engagement team with a person disrupting the meeting who eventually left the chamber. That led to a recess to calm things down and get the council back to work. And Hannah, I just wanted to look at that for a second. There's a little bit of a pattern emerging here when it comes to controversial measures, some loud public comment, disrupted meetings. What's your take on what happened this week?
Yeah, I mean, definitely this isn't the first time this has happened for this city council. It wasn't something that really happened with the last one, though there was always rowdy public commenters who very loudly disagreed with stuff the council was doing. I think it's only a matter of time before the council realizes that they could just extend public comment for, in this case, it might have just needed like another hour.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't have to do an hour of delays from recess and then get the cops involved and get security and, worsen the relationship.
Yeah, sorry to jump in, but I think the whole pushback on cutting off public comment has been, we don't want to have these, 4.5 hour meetings. And lo and behold, we had a 4.5 hour meeting. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a lot better for their, I think, relationship with the public to encourage that encourage even their louder disagreeers to vocalize. And also it's interesting that in that meeting, Kathy Moore then convened a panel of people who agreed with her to speak at length about the policy, and then cut short public comment, which included people who agreed with her, but honestly, mostly was people who didn't agree with her and don't get invited to speak on panels at City Hall.
Yeah, that's a very good point there. I do want to see, I want to see what happens with the upshot of this meeting, because it appears the council is going to be voting on them next week. Both measures passed out of committee, 9 amendments total, all of those passed. And I have to point out to everybody, if you haven't been following this issue, this whole deal with soda and soap is a shift for the city. The council repealed these measures 4 years ago because they believed they were discriminatory. Now they are back with new gross misdemeanor penalties in place, and the amendments were really all about growing these soda and soap regions. So we can put these exclusion zones in this district, A lot of council members were interested in that. I wanted to get your take, Hannah, on, I guess, just what impact you think these measures are going to have overall on the city.
Well, I mean, it really depends on if the city, I do anticipate that the city council will pass both of these measures, but we're always complaining about a staffing shortage or not enough police for the high expectations of the city. And so it's unclear that they'll be able to enforce these kind of measures, but it does just give implicit permission to police to almost like a stop and frisk kind of thing.
The Terry stop kind of a thing.
Yeah, like it's just going to give permission for police to have more interactions with people they either think have drug like crimes in their past or think are involved in sex work. And so it's sort of like a profiling issue. It opens up, and I think it just makes the city less friendly to people who have been to court for drug offenses, in my opinion.
Okay. Yeah. I got you. I do want to make sure I hit the point home, though. Kathy Moore, Councilmember Moore, is saying she really wants to focus this measure on sex traffickers, on Johns, and she put that in the language of this bill here. So I can see the intent there, at least. Do you see that as well? Because there was a lot of going back and forth about not trying to target the sex workers, but rather target the people who are buying sex, for example.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to take it back even a step further, she's also saying that this isn't about sex work at all. It's about gun violence. And so
Right.
if she really wants it to be about gun violence, she should do something about gun violence. But I mean, to your point, like sex workers will tell you that this model of going after Johns doesn't make sex workers safer. It pushes their work further and further into the shadows, which is how you get trafficking and how you get really like abusive dynamics in sex work. And that if she cares about sex workers, she can't or if Kathy Moore cares about sex workers, the solution is not to criminalize Johns.
Wow, it's going to be such an interesting next couple of months here as we watch this unfold. Enforcement's going to be a big issue. Who gets busted in all this is going to be a big issue. Does this actually reduce gun violence? That's going to be a big issue. I got that real sense that the council said we have to do something. I heard that from Council President Nelson a number of times here. So we'll see what this something does. I did want to move on to another topic with you, if I could, though, Hannah. Also on the docket this week, the Housing and Human Services Committee, led by Councilmember Moore, is working on a new interlocal agreement proposed between the city of Seattle and the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. Hannah likes to call it KICRA, which I think is the cutest name for any government authority ever, all time. But the crux of the issue is this: the way that KICRA is governed. They have had two governing boards in the past. This 13-member implementation board with subject matter experts. They're on a volunteer basis there. And then there was a 12-member board with 9 elected officials, 3 lived experience members. That led to some challenges in oversight. The council memo on this issue points that out. And there's a new agreement on the table now that would trim this down to one governing board. Wanted to make sure I gave that background, folks. But Hannah, I just wanted to get your thoughts on what impact this whole idea of having one governing board is going to have on KICRA, the city, and really how our region approaches homelessness.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like the KICRA stuff is just so like back and forth, and it's such a like new-ish like agency that, I mean, to me obviously this is born out of all the controversy that happened with Mark Jones, and so it seems like the city and the county want to regain some control or more control over KICRA, which I don't know. It all sort of to me it feels like eventually we're just going to be moving all these services back into the city,
or the county.
Yeah, like it feels like some people like the mayor or maybe the county exec or others in those administrations don't want it to be a separate agency, and maybe there's some buyer's remorse in doing this whole regional approach. But I don't know, I haven't been following it as closely as other things. So, but
yeah, it's just that control issue is the one I always come back to, Hannah, because I really sense that the mayor wants more control. He wants on this board. He wants to be making some of these decisions. He wants council members who are sympathetic to him behind him on this board making these decisions. And I've just heard it so many different ways. But this whole idea of Seattle can't do this on its own, I think that's still real. And I think that the county recognizes that too. I just wonder what's going to come out of this and what sort of agency we're going to be left with if it is indeed a board that's mainly controlled by Seattle voices and King County voices. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I'm sort of sympathetic to like the Seattle position that Seattle and King County or Seattle's paying the most out of
Right.
any city, and so it sort of makes sense that they would have more say, or maybe they have. I'm not sure like how it breaks down like per capita, like how many people are unhoused in Seattle,
Sure, sure.
but I somewhat understand why Seattle would want more say, but it seems weird that Seattle moved to this approach, then wants more control. It seems like they kind of want both ways. Like they want a fall guy of having this like agency that they don't have a lot of control of, but then they also want to have final say over everything. It seems like they kind of have to, I don't know, reckon with that still.
Yeah, for certain. This is going to be an interesting one to watch play out as well. But this is something that the council's committee that deals with housing and human services is going to be talking about this week. We'll see what happens with this over the course of the next few weeks before that big deadline of September 24th, when the council goes into budget mode all the time, every time. So a lot still ahead there. And guess what? There's a lot still ahead on our program as well, including a vote not to vote. What just happened with the city council and its response to putting the voter-approved social housing measure on the ballot? We're going to try to pull this apart. What the council is doing here with this measure, coming up on Now Hear This. Well, if you're a little bit confused about what's happening with the Seattle City Council and its response to the social housing funding measure that gathered enough signatures to make the ballot, well, guess what? You're not alone. This week, the council voted not to make a decision just yet on what it wants to do with this measure. The options on the table: simply let it go to the ballot as is, or create a competing measure that would go up against it. Supporters of I-137 point out, hey, we got the signatures. Why haven't you put this on the November ballot already? This week, it was Councilmember Maritza Rivera putting forth the notion of asking for more time.
I just feel like there's this rhetoric around somehow this is a delay, but the soonest this can come before the voters is February, no matter whether we vote today or any time before the 20th.
I should point out that motion passed with a 6-3 vote. Council members Moore, Hollingsworth, and Morales were the no votes. And Councilmember Rivera said it a couple of times during the council meeting this week. We have until the 20th of September to make a decision on this. I just wanted to get some background on this to our listeners here in terms of what I-137 is. It proposes a 5% excess compensation tax on companies for each employee with a salary over $1 million. This would go towards permanently funding subsidized housing, the social housing measure. Hannah, I wanted to get your take on this. I know you reported earlier that maybe Councilmember Strauss is working on an alternative. What's the behind the scenes here?
Yeah. Last I heard, Councilmember Strauss is no longer considering that alternative. There was some talk about him doing an alternative, and he told me last week that he was thinking about an alternative to address some legal concerns, but there's still talk about other alternatives in the works, the main one being one that the Seattle Times editorial board kind of just endorsed earlier this week, maybe yesterday, that would, instead of paying for social housing with a new tax on big business, would pay for social housing with the existing housing levy.
Right.
What was your question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to figure out what's next. Does that sound like a viable option to you, or what in terms of that funding piece?
I mean, it's totally against the spirit of the original initiative, which part of like House Our Neighbors, who ran the campaign, part of their whole argument was we're not going to be taking resources away from existing programs.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
We're not going to be interfering with the levy, which is already stretched so thin with so many different affordable housing developers and landlords trying to get projects off the ground. And so they're like, we want to do this separate thing, social housing, which is its own thing, and we want to do it without taking from anyone else. And so this alternative that does not exist yet would really be counter to the spirit of that, and also like would perpetuate sort of this regressive tax system that we have in Washington and Seattle, where we rely so heavily on property taxes to fund important programs when we don't really tax as much big business or the wealthy because we don't have an income tax. So I mean, if you like regressive taxes, maybe that's the way to go.
Yeah, right. I hear you. And I think one of the big concerns that I heard brought up in council chambers was at least one from Councilmember Kettle. He said, "You know what? We're probably going to get sued over this if a measure like this passes, and we're probably going to lose." So, looking towards some of the legal issues behind this here, and I know they've heard from their legal counsel, and I know
Mhm.
that Councilmember Strauss was very concerned about, there's a client privilege here that he doesn't want to mess with and things of that nature. That whole legal question in terms of how this funding measure was constructed, do you think that holds water, or what do you think about that piece of it?
I sure wish they would tell me what the legal concern is,
Mm,
because there's no way to really know if it holds water, but it's not up to them. Like,
right,
it's up to the courts to decide, what's legal and what's not legal. They pass and they can't stop the initiative whether it's legal or not. They
right.
have to put it
And
on
I
ballot.
wanted to make sure I pointed that out. This isn't a situation where they can say, we're not going to put this on the ballot. There's only those two options of either it goes or it goes with an alternative to it, right?
And so ultimately, it'll be up to the voters if they want to pass it. And then if someone wants to bring a challenge, and someone always will, even if it's perfectly legal, big business is going to challenge us. They always do. And so someone might bring a challenge, and then we have to hope that our city attorney is competent enough to defend our the people's will.
Yeah, and that's what I come back to as well, and we've heard it from Councilmember Morales a number of times that this should be just a pro forma type of situation. This is what people wanted. We're going to put this on the ballot. This is our job as a council. And I guess it's that delay, like dragging this out towards
Mhm.
September 20th, as Councilmember Rivera is saying here. That's what's introducing, at least to me, all these different question marks in my mind. Is there an alternative? Are we just holding out for this? Or do you have a feel for that at all if we are going to see some sort of alternative measure to this on the ballot?
I think after the Seattle Times Ed Board came out in support of an alternative, it seems like the Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce is supporting an alternative that would use the levy instead. It makes sense that some of these council members who won their seat with money from big business would seek to, like, not tax big business at any
Sure.
cost. But it's strange after Councilmember Sarah Nelson in her like first few years sort of made a big fuss about the council interfering with approval voting, interfering as in putting
Yeah.
an alternative. It's not interference. It is perfectly in their jurisdiction or in their purview to do.
Bailiwick. Yeah. Picket. Hmm.
So it seems weird that now what in the case of the approval voting is relatively quick, transparent
Mm,
process, and then this process has dragged on for so long, and like where's Sarah Nelson coming in saying, "Hey guys, we have to be transparent and we can't be interfering as the council." That was her whole shtick 2 years ago. It just seems like
right.
a really big shift for her.
Yeah, that's a great observation there, Hannah. And we'll see what happens with this issue going forward. But again, looks like every eye is on next week to see what the council does if this
Mhm.
this deadline, I guess if you want to call it, of September 20th actually comes and goes, and if anything happens. So I'll stay tuned with you. We'll both be tuned into the Seattle channel, Hannah. I know it. I did want to move on though. However, talk about a public safety forum, if I could, with you here. This is something that's actually happening in the CID this week. I thought this was pretty interesting. So we have on Wednesday night, council members Wu and Kettle, Council President Nelson. You have SPD's Chief Sue Rar and Amy Barden from the Care Department. This is a community forum focused on public safety and life within the Chinatown International District. And we've all seen it. A lot of reports of shootings in the CID this year. There was one at Hing Hay Park just last week. There was a deadly shooting back in June on 8th Avenue South. I guess I just wanted to get your feel on this, Hannah. What do you think a session like this, a listening session along these lines, is actually going to accomplish?
Um, I'm not sure. I think a lot of these listening sessions, um, I don't know. I mean, it depends on who shows up, right?
Right.
Because everyone has a different opinion on like how is best to move forward. I think a lot of times listening sessions attract people who have more free time and
Mm,
feel more like respected by the council, and so I feel like she'll hear a lot of things she agrees with.
yeah. And I guess I wanted to ask too how much of this is uh I'm sure it's not an official campaign stop, but it almost turns into that in some ways, right? Because I feel like when we talk about the competition for this position 8 seat, of course, Tanya Wu is the incumbent. She's held this position for about 8 months now. She's going up against a challenger in Alexis Mercedes Rink, who got more than 50% of the vote back in the August primary there. So I feel like this issue of public safety, which Tanya Wu has said, this is my top priority, she almost has to double down on these types of events to try to promote her image in that way. Did you sense that too?
It seems pretty clear from fundraisers for Tanya Wu that their campaign and the PAC supporting their campaign really wants to paint her opponent as the defund
Right.
candidate. And so it seems like, yeah, you're absolutely right that she's going to, position herself as much as possible as the pro cop, the pro police candidate in the race. And I don't know. I mean, from my perspective, Alexis Mercedes Rink hasn't really. Maybe she has some of like the wrappings of a defund candidate, but I don't really know if she's said so much
Right.
about it.
That's a pretty big accusation to lay at somebody's feet. And I have heard
Yeah.
Tanya Wu say that about her opponent there. And I just wonder what that discussion about public safety is going to be about, because very interesting and maybe ironically enough, Tanya Wu, as you know, Hannah, actually leads a public kind of street outreach, sort of community outreach in the CID, which is a 911 alternative. And I know she supports that type of activity too. So I don't know. It all depends on, okay, how much you're going to push that police piece, how much you're going to push these alternatives here. I feel like it's a fine line, and bringing up that defund hammer, I'm not sure. Is that ploy going to work? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, we're headed into an even year election on a presidential year, so it's going to be probably a larger turnout election. I think that the last election brought us a lot of this sort of backlash to the defund.
Yeah.
The council who never defunded the police, to be
Yes.
clear.
Right. Yeah. Right.
But
Yeah.
the council that was framed as the defund council, and this new council won, being the backlash to that, and they benefited greatly from having a low turnout election. And so we've seen in the primary for 2024 that people aren't buying what Tanya's selling, and with the even bigger turnout we're expecting in the general, it just doesn't really. I don't know what Tanya Wu could say that would make up this huge gap she has between her and Alexis.
Yeah, that 12% that separates them is stark, especially for an incumbent that's kind of looking up at the challenger now who's leading the race. So very good points there made, Hannah. All right, I do need to move on with you, however, and we have a great question to finish up here. Actually, a number of different questions. Some city budget questions from our patrons. It's actually a double shot here, Hannah, so I hope you're ready for this. We're going to talk about it coming up on You Ask, We Answer. Really appreciate getting these questions in from patrons. If you write to Seattle News, Views, and Brews at gmail.com, make sure we work on getting those patrons' questions answered. And we got a great one from Blake, patron, writing in this one. He was actually working off an article from the esteemed David Croman in the Times a couple of weeks ago, where David wrote, analysts previously estimated Jumpstart would bring in $311 million. Now it's expected to collect more than $400 million. Estimates for next year have been revised up to more than $430 million and $450 million the year after that. So here's Blake's question, Hannah. Let's say that the current city council chooses to use the Jumpstart revenue to plug the general fund deficit. So if the deficit stays somewhere between 260 and 300 million for the year, the city would theoretically have a little bit left over from Jumpstart if the forecasts are correct. So here's this big question. If the council made a change to allow Jumpstart to be used for the general fund, what would happen after the budget deficit is dealt with? Would those remaining dollars be used for affordable housing and climate as they were initially intended? Or would the payroll tax just be a slush fund for the general budget going forward? Wow, that's a big question, Blake. And I wanted to lay that one on you, Hannah, because I know you've done a lot of different stories about progressive revenue. So some thoughts about what Blake is asking there and using Jumpstart potentially as a slush fund?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on what the council. So the council has to, or the mayor has to propose a way to change how Jumpstart works. And so they could change it so it frees up 50% of Jumpstart money can
Yep.
go into the general fund.
They've
Or
done this in the past. Yeah, keep going.
yeah, for sure. Or they could change the spending categories or add a spending category or whatever. So, I mean, we'll know kind of how that math goes once I'm sure the mayor's planning on proposing a change to how we allow Jumpstart spending. So he'll start the conversation on September 24th with his budget proposal, which will, as the central staff has said, will include some kind of change to Jumpstart to balance at least part of the general fund. I don't know. We don't know how much it's going to be, but if anything they didn't change in the law, I guess, to go to the general fund would stay in the Jumpstart categories.
Okay. And those lanes, right, for affordable housing, Green New Deal, and that kind of a thing. Thank you. All right, well, here's question number 2 from Blake Hanna. You're killing it. What do you think would be the impact to favorability and electoral consequences if the council were to do this? Do you think constituents or voters find this to be a popular or unpopular option versus deep, severe cuts? That's the big question here, Blake. Do you have some thoughts on that one, Hannah? How popular or unpopular it is to raid the Jumpstart tax?
I think the Jumpstart tax is so abstract to so many people who aren't like constantly reading the news. But I mean, if the message can be that the council is defunding affordable housing, which is what Jumpstart pays for, they're defunding the Green New Deal initiatives, which is what the Jumpstart payroll tax pays for, and then using that to subsidize whatever, then I think that's going to be really unpopular. But if the message is just they're changing a little bit of the budget to like be fiscally responsible to
and save these services and things like that.
Exactly. But then when you look at it, it's like, well, they're taking away money for affordable housing so that they can keep having these huge hiring bonuses for police that we have no idea if they work, and they've tried before, and there's no real evidence that it's going to work in the context of a national hiring shortage. But I mean, it also depends on what they decide to cut in tandem, because I think the more direct cuts are perhaps more damaging to their favorability, and that's what makes me think they're going to really focus on rating Jumpstart, because it's more abstract than saying we're gonna defund the Office of Labor Standards so that we can do this deficit fill so we don't have to defund our darlings like the police or other departments that they really favor.
I see what you're saying. So rather than that concrete, tangible thing that they're cutting, they can use Jumpstart to kind of peanut butter over it. Is that your take here? Is that where the council's going here? It seems almost too convenient. It's like, here's a $260 million budget hole. And wait a minute. We've got $300 million from Jumpstart. Let's just kind of smash it in there. I know what Blake is saying here when it comes to how unpopular or popular this is, but just from a very pragmatic standpoint, it almost seems like that's going to be the move here that we're going to see from the mayor's office.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about priorities, right? Because let's not think about it as Jumpstart. Let's think about what it is. It's affordable housing. Does it make sense to take $250 million away from affordable housing so that you don't have to take any money from police? That's the super convenient thing that you're bringing up. To me, that's not convenient.
Okay. Blake, this is a great set of questions you sent our way. And Hannah, as always, great hearing you answer them. I did want to make sure I wrapped up. If you had to had to write that essay at the start of school, what I did on my summer vacation, how would it read? Just wanted to make sure I asked you that one.
On my summer vacation? Is it summer even?
Yeah. Well, it's over now. Yeah.
I did the endorsements for the Stranger Election Control Board.
And loved it. And loved every second of it. Wow. Yeah. And also agonized on the shorts versus jeans. That's a big part of it too. Hannah, thanks a million. I appreciate you jumping in here.
Sweet. Thanks for having me. Always.
Okay. Anytime, all the time. Thank you, Hannah. Thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, the podcast where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Thanks again to the patrons who support the show. Sam, thanks for jumping on board. Blake, thank you for a great question. If you are not a patron, get on it. Find this podcast on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Listen to us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Thanks for watching on Converge Media 2. We'll see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2024.